Okay, pin your facing together just so that it's lined up and connected. It'll help you here. Line up the two centre back sections of facing and seam and just put a pin in there as a temporary measure. You're not going to actually sew across this at this point. You then measure from that pin down 7 centimetres and put in another pin, and this one is your starting point. So move the dress under the sewing machine and you're going to sew straight down the centre back. At this point it is a good idea, having started 2 or 3 stitches, to reverse. So you've got a secure close at that section of the centre back seam, and then sew straight down to the bottom and off. The next task that we all have to do is to either zigzag or overlock off the side seams. So, starting at the facing end, overlock these seams together . Now, I'm quite fussy about overlocking. There is actually a right side to the stitch which relates to the top of the sewing machine, or the overlocker rather, if you think of it in that way. So for us, the next seam that I will do here, I'll turn it and go from the hem, and then I will also show you that we're going to overlock the facing edge off as well. Right, I'm now at the facing, the end of it, which is still raw, and I'm going to just overlock that edge off. Make sure that the side seam goes towards the back. And I'm now coming round into the front facing. Again, just check that your side seam is going in the correct direction underneath towards the back. And I shall now turn it to sew the hem, to overlock the hem. I'm now at the hem, actually at the centre back. This seam is open underneath, like that. So again, make sure that they don't flick in a funny direction. The side seam that you are coming up to goes towards the centre back. And then you overlock across the front. Again, checking that the seam is going towards the centre back. And when you arrive back near the centre back section, you swing the work away from the foot so it crosses over. So you blend it and you can come off neatly. Pin the two bottom edges of your facing, this is the bit that you've just overlocked, together. And you can see the pencil mark I've put here by my index finger. which is about 4 centimetres. It doesn't really matter at this stage, you're just making a small seam up from overlocked edge to the pencil mark, and machine that out at 1.5 centimetres, 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go forward a couple of stitches, then reverse, and then up to the pencil mark and reverse again securely. And what we're doing here is connecting together the bits that will make the back neck opening. So that's the first thing. You can actually finger press this. You don't need to get it to the ironing board, just open it up and smooth it with a finger. The next stage is to make a loop for your centre back button and loop fastening. So I will show you that in a moment. Right, making a loop. You want this to run on the bias, which is the stretchiest grain of the lot, as you can see. I've pinched this square from a friend who's actually using the scraps to make a quilt, because I have no idea what I've done with my offcuts. Fold it in half, absolutely on the bias. You, in fact, only want your loop to be about 5 centimetres long, but it's much easier to work with a longer piece of material. So the first row I'm doing is a foot space. So you put the edge of the foot to the fold of your cloth. Stitch that right down. You don't need to reverse. Pick it up, put it back in under the machine and stitch another row down the middle. And you're going to have to do this by eye. Stretch it quite firmly as you go. Like that. So you've ended up with 2 parallel rows of stitching. And we're going to trim up to the first row that we stitched and then pull it through on a rouleau turner.
3, 2, 1.
With a smallish pair of scissors, because you can control them better, trim close to the first row of stitching. Like that. So you're going to end up with a much narrower looking object. To turn out a piece of rouleau, you need a thing called a rouleau turner, which is a metal length like this with a barbed hook at this end, and you thread the core of what you've just stitched out. You thread this rouleau turner through out the other end, and then I will show you how you hook it at that end. So I've hooked it through the fabric and shut the little sort of hinged section, and then you ease it through itself until it's caught and it starts pulling through. You do need to take a reasonable bite of fabric, and obviously if it's fine fabric like a chiffon, you've got to take a really good bite of it. That has just broken out, but luckily at the right point. So you just carry on pulling. If it buckles up and sticks, just pull the gathers back away from the bunching and then ease it through again. And that's how you end up with a nice, neat, narrow piece of rouleau. And you then press that flat at the iron. The strip that I've made, I've actually cut in half because we know it was far too long. I've then bent it in half again and just very roughly hand stitched that together so it doesn't slip. Then you're going to put this, doesn't matter which side of the centre back of the dress you apply it, but you're going to put it at the top on the centre back seam where the facing joins the centre back neck of the dress, and attach it first before you close the facing over. Again, the more that you can attach in stages before you stitch the next bit to it, the easier your job will be, because nothing then slips. So just like that. Now I've also set it fractionally below that seam allowance, seam line I should say, and pointed it with scissors. The seam line is at the absolute pointed edge of the scissor, and that I've set a couple of millimetres below. This is because you need something called tolerance to go over the bulk formed by this loop. If you shove it up too high, the facing won't sit down properly. And I'll now show you next how to close out that section of centre back facing to the dress. I've folded the back facing straight down over the other half of itself, which is underneath, over the loop that we've just stitched in, and I'm going to hang on to these threads so when the machine starts snatching into stitch, it doesn't pull them out of the needle, which can happen, because that little bit is quite bulky, so you've got to encourage it over. Stitch down as far as the pin, and I have put in a little bit of a pencil mark there, and again you're doing the same width seam of 1.5. Don't stitch over the pin, you'll break the needle. Reverse, come off. That's one side done, and I'll turn the work and repeat it so you can see what I do for the other side. So I've turned the work over. This time you have not got the loop to go over, because this will be the side when you finish that you actually stitch the button to. But it's exactly the same apart from that. You're stitching 1.5 or 5/8 of an inch away from the, as your seam allowance, down to the centre back stitching line that you can see in front of you, and then you reverse and stop. You'll remember that you partially stitched the facing centre back seam together up to that pencil mark. You've now got to finish stitching it to hit the stitching line of the other part of the centre back opening. So you literally have got, I don't know, about 2.5–3 centimetres to stitch away, and keep the machine at a slow speed so you can control what you're doing. So that's stitched that together. I suggest that you clip a little bit of the corner. You just need to clip a bit of the bulk off here, and possibly on the other side where the loops are, but I'm going to have to move this, turn it, so that I can actually physically do it. So again, just cut some of that away. Be very careful that you don't cut so far back that you hit the seam that you've painstakingly put together. Now we're going to turn this the right way round. Put your thumbs into the inside section, twist the facing out, and just pull. So that's the loop side. Do exactly the same thing for the other one. And poke it so it's flat. And there is your centre back with the loop obviously attached in, and I'll find a button in a minute to put on. Many years ago, a student of mine taught me this trick, which is so useful. It's called a guideline stitch. I don't know whether that's a technical term. It's the one that Barbara came up with. So it works probably for hems up to around about 2 centimetres deep. I don't think I'd do it for anything any bigger. I'm putting the outside edge of the foot on the inside edge of the overlocking on the single layer of fabric, and you literally stitch all the way around the hem from centre back right across the whole circumference of the hem. Okay, I finished the guideline, pressed it at the ironing board so that that guideline just shows a little pip to the wrong side. The easiest way to get a nice straight line is to do it on the right side. Line up the outside edge of the foot to the fold of your hem and off you go. Don't look at the needle, look at the foot, the toe of the foot to the fold edge of your fabric, and you'll end up with a nice even top stitched hem all the way round. Carry on round to the end, reverse and come off. So there's our finished top stitched hem. I'm now disappearing up to the other end to the centre back loop, and I'm going to attach a button to the centre back neck, and I've got an old quite nice vintage one that I'm just going to hand stitch on, and the final touches are to hand stitch down the bottom end of the facings under the underarm. There's the button now stitched on, and coming over to the bottom of the underarm facing, I'm just hand catching that with a double thread with a knot in the back down to the seam, and obviously you don't go through to the right side, it is literally just to hold the two together, and cast off by going back through the loop. And there you have one finished dress. Okay, here's our finished dress on the stand. Everything is available from our online shop, which is www.snippetsneedlework.com. The instructions for making this are available on the YouTube channel. We will supply you, obviously, pattern, fabric, all the bits that you need if you'd like it, and just have a go. It's great fun.